Hey everyone, John Reardon here for Nintendo World Report TV. A little while back when Force Gemini hit the Japanese NSO app, I posted a story on NintendoWorldReport.com along with a series of tweets discussing how the aspect ratio when playing in widescreen was scaled incorrectly. Quite a few sites, including Eurogamer and Nintendo Life, picked up the story as well, so thanks for that, fellas. And that resulted in a lot of people reaching out to me to either clarify how widescreen worked on the Nintendo 64 or to just straight up insist that I was wrong. And honestly, this is not intended as shade to any of those people. Early implementations of widescreen are widely different from how they work today. I get tripped up by it myself now and then, and I'm someone who works professionally in video production and is an avid retro game collector. It's confusing. So I thought I'd make a quick video to more thoroughly explain the specific issue with Force Gemini on NSO that I hope will also be useful for anyone playing these games on old hardware using modern displays. Alright, let's get some terminology out of the way. An aspect ratio is, simply put, the width of a display relative to its height. So when we're talking about an old CRT television like we would have used to play N64 games back in the day, this aspect ratio would usually be 4:3, though other aspect ratios did exist even at that time. 4 is the horizontal size, and 3 is the height. We can visualize this really easily by saying that if we break the width of the display into 4 equal parts, the height would consist of 3 of those parts. We can do an even simpler one. Let's say we had an aspect ratio of 1:1. We'd know that the width of 1 and the height of 1 are equal, so that display would be a perfect square. Most modern TVs have an aspect ratio of 16:9, which we commonly refer to as widescreen. Using the same technique as before, we can split the TV into 16 horizontal sections, and we'd need 9 of those sections to fill its height. Makes sense. Easy. Now, aspect ratios are important because they determine how a device, in this case a Nintendo 64, outputs its video signal. Most Nintendo 64 games output an image consisting of 76,800 pixels. That probably sounds like a lot, but that's because we don't usually describe resolution in total pixels, but rather in a manner exactly like aspect ratios. First, we describe the number of vertical columns lined up along the bottom of the image, then the number of rows going across the image stacked up along the edge. So we describe those 76,800 pixels as 320 by 240, 320 being the horizontal resolution and 240 being the vertical. Now what's cool, if you like math, is that if we stack these as a fraction, 320 over 240, and simplify it, we get the familiar number of 4/3, or a 4:3 aspect ratio. We can do the same thing with the output from a Nintendo Switch of 1920 by 1080, which simplifies down to 16/9, or 16:9. Math is neat. So from that, we can see that the 320 by 240 resolution that the Nintendo 64 outputs is just sort of inherently built to be displayed in a 4:3 aspect ratio. So what if a developer wanted to make their game run in 16:9? In the late 90s and early 2000s, plenty of game developers wanted to fit a 16:9 image in a 4:3 shell, and they came up with 2 different ways to do it, depending on what their exact goal was. The first was called letterboxing. This was generally used if you wanted a widescreen image, but still wanted to use a 4:3 TV. This technique would simply shrink down an entire 16:9 image to fit in a 4:3 box, resulting in black bars at the top and bottom when viewed on a 4:3 TV. This is the method that Force Gemini uses, and so we'll get back to it in a moment. The other method is called anamorphic widescreen. With this method, the 16:9 image was squished horizontally, so that when it was stretched horizontally onto a 16:9 TV, it would appear correct. This was generally used if you were going to display the image on an actual 16:9 TV, not a 4:3 TV, and became more common later on. You can see it in games like Star Fox Adventures, where when you toggle on the widescreen if you're playing on a 4:3 display, the image will kind of squish. And this is the technique that the Switch is attempting to account for when it runs Force Gemini in widescreen mode. So there's our problem. Force Gemini is using letterboxed widescreen, and the Switch is accounting for anamorphic widescreen. The result of this is that the image, which would look like a 16:9 image when viewed on a 4:3 TV, is just stretched horizontally, meaning that the black bars, which were only there to account for the 4:3 screen it's no longer being displayed on, are still there, and the characters on screen appear short and wide. I've seen several people send me pictures of the game running on real N64 hardware, hooked up to a modern TV saying this is how it looks on real hardware. But you have to remember that the widescreen implementation in question was designed for a 4x3 TV. Think of it like putting a Super Nintendo game on a widescreen TV and stretching it to fill the full screen. Obviously, the characters are just going to get really stretched out, and the image will be distorted. This is what you're doing in Jet Force Gemini, because those black bars at the top and bottom, as far as your TV or the Switch know, are part of the image. We can prove this definitively using the aspect ratio math that we talked about earlier. First, we can look at the game running in widescreen mode in a 4x3 display on actual hardware, exactly how it would have displayed on a CRT at the time. If we split the horizontal length of the image into 16 parts, because we're assuming it's 16 by 9, and then see how many of those same parts it would take to fill the vertical height of the image, comes up to 9. Now, if we do that same thing using the Switch version, running in widescreen mode, we can split the horizontal image into 16 parts, but now it only takes 7 of those parts to make up the height. It's 16 by 7. To fix it, what Nintendo would need to do is apply the same scaling factor they've applied to scale the image horizontally to the vertical axis as well. This will crop out the black bars and present an image that is 16 by 9. Now, I know that some of you will insist that this letterbox image was designed to be stretched and those bars are supposed to be there. So rather than just sit here and tell you that you're wrong, let's explore that possibility. In theory, widescreen mode should present us with the same image, but with additional visibility on the left and right. But it shouldn't distort the sizes of the game running in 4x3 mode if displayed correctly. We should be able to line up the middle of the 16 by 9 image with the 4x3 image and have those be exactly the same. If we take the game and assume both modes were designed for a 4x3 display, as I'm proposing, we can then evenly scale up the 16 by 9 image and see that none of the characters or environments appear squished or distorted compared to the non-widescreen version. We just have extra visibility on the left and right. Now let's try that same thing using the Switch version. When we try this, we can see that the characters in widescreen mode are shorter than they are in normal 4x3 mode. Why? Because they're horizontally stretched. For the sake of argument, this is what widescreen mode would look like in Jet Force Gemini if it were designed to be stretched horizontally, as so many have insisted to me that it was. This is what it would look like in anamorphic widescreen, which we can all agree isn't what it is. Now, if you're like me, your immediate question after seeing all of this is, why does GoldenEye 007 work? That's a great question. And it's because despite releasing 2 years earlier, the team working on GoldenEye did a great job of future-proofing their game. GoldenEye features separate screen and aspect ratio settings. This allows it to support both letterboxing to display 16 by 9 on a 4x3 TV, just like Jet Force Gemini, and anamorphic widescreen, allowing a truly 16 by 9 signal to be squished into a 4x3 box. The presence of anamorphic widescreen allows the Switch to do exactly what it does on Jet Force Gemini, but because it's anamorphic, stretching that image produces a proper 16 by 9 image. It also still allows for letterboxing by setting the aspect ratio to 4x3 and then selecting wide in the screen options. You can even set the game to cinema mode, which produces an extra wide image. All of these display correctly, which makes it extra disappointing that Jet Force Gemini was obviously put onto NSO without proper testing, or perhaps just an understanding of how these old widescreen methods worked. Because unless you have a pretty good handle on late 90s aspect ratio techniques, I'm not sure how much of this is common knowledge anymore. So I don't really blame them. The good news is that this would be very easy for Nintendo to fix. They clearly already have an image scaling implementation in their N64 emulator. We can see that in both GoldenEye and the admittedly distorted Jet Force Gemini, which do scale to fill the entire horizontal width of the screen. All they have to do is scale the image vertically in addition to horizontally, and this issue will be sorted. So, Mr. Nintendo Sir, if you're watching, please fix Jet Force Gemini. It's one of my favorite Rare games, and I'd like to see it looking its best on Switch. But hopefully that helps clarify my issues with Jet Force Gemini on the Switch, and maybe is a useful tool if you're ever looking to display some of these old games on a modern TV. I know that not everyone is super picky about getting the aspect ratio just right, but it's always something that bugged me when a game is distorted and not displaying the way its developers designed it to display. If you did enjoy the video, consider subscribing to Nintendo World Report TV and checking out NintendoWorldReport.com for a whole lot more. If you'd like to chat with us about aspect ratios, or anything else Nintendo related, you can hit us up in our Discord. There's a link in the description. If you want to get a hold of me specifically, maybe you still have questions, you can reach out on whatever we're calling Twitter these days, or Blue Sky, or I think I'm on Threads. It's all the same handle everywhere, so just use one of those. Once again, my name's John Reardon. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.